We might have to start the chairs out here again soon. We used to have the table and the not table. And everybody went to the table.
More chairs on the side over there.
Yeah, people like the table.
Yeah.
All right. Didn't have all this camera gear then either.
Yeah, why two cameras?
Well, the phone is for Facebook Live because some people watch it live, and then it goes on the church Facebook page, and so they can catch it there. This camera is for YouTube, and so it's just a lot. If I could take that off of Facebook, but the quality isn't as good. So at Sunday afternoons, I come home and I take this and the sermon, and I just upload it to YouTube. And usually the Freddie and Paul show, but they go on different channels. So Freddie and I have the Freddie and Paul. That was in some ways. Well, I used to do YouTube hangouts on the air for the sermons on Sunday, and like there was one woman who I could tell because with hangouts on the air, you'd get a little picture of the person there. And so she'd be driving around, she'd be in the mall, and she'd be watching the sermon as she's in the mall. And so then I stopped that. And then Freddie comes to me one day and says, "Pastor Paul, you and I should do a TV show." He had been down to public access and done some of that stuff there, but I wasn't going to go down to public access and deal with that schedule. So I said, "I'll tell you what, Freddie, I'm just going to take my phone and we'll record like little 5-minute shows. You can rap and we'll talk about sports and whatever you want to do." And so that's how the Freddie and Paul show started. That started over a year before I got into the other YouTube stuff. So then and then when the other YouTube stuff hit, it was like, what am I going to do with the Freddie and Paul show? So we keep doing it. Freddie was really excited because our metrics bumped quite a bit after the other stuff happened. He's like, "Oh, Pastor Paul, look at all the hits we're getting. Look at all the comments." So, yeah, I was a little nervous about how that would go, but it's really been fine. So yeah, Sundays we do Sunday school and the sermon, and often the Freddie and Paul show if he and Nancy are around. Last week I did the Freddie and Paul show before the service because Freddie was here early, and then Nancy came to church and was like, "I haven't been around for weeks, I haven't done a show," so it's really the Freddie and Nancy and Paul show. But anyway, let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this new day, and we thank you for the Gospel of John. Lord, what a gift the Bible is to us in so many ways. The ability to read these stories with generations and generations of people and engage in a very long, old, worldwide conversation about these stories. Have you worked through these stories in our hearts and lives? So bless our conversation, bless what we learn, and give us your peace. So we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right. John 5. Last week we talked a lot about manuscripts. So we've dealt with that.
It was good, Paul.
And so, I want to at least open your eyes to this technical thing because it does come up.
It does.
And like Edie said, Lee Strobel, and this is an area that does come up because people will say things to Christians like, "Well, you can't trust the Bible because," and then they'll go into this, and it's like, that's so. Now we'll deal with the story today. After Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days, inside the city near the Sheep's Gate was the pool of Bethesda with, I'm I'm reading in the NLT. Now there was in Jerusalem near the sheep's gate a pool, which in Aramaic was called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades, or 5 porches. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Oh, that's quite a while. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" See, now we got to start the new with I used to have 2 rows that came up from the we call it the front porch, but everybody liked the table, so you're comfortable there? Okay.
The best chair in the house. Chair right here. Your chair. Yeah.
Sit between Joanne and Corinne. Okay. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been there in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Isn't that an interesting question? That's what the man thought too. "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you from carrying your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away in the crowd that was there. Later Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse might happen to you."
Yes.
The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." Okay. What's going to follow in verse 18 is going to be a long discussion about some things. Now what we're beginning to see is what will become a pattern in John where you have a story and then you have a discourse. Now what I almost always notice is that people are very interested in the story. They kind of glide over the discourse because it's a lot harder to figure out. All right, so today we're going to talk about the story. What's this story about?
A man being healed.
Okay, a man being healed. What were you saying, Barbara?
I was thinking that was too easy to say that.
Yeah, it's a trick question.
Jesus running into
Opposition.
negative reaction.
Yes, okay, what's the story about? The story's about a man being healed.
Paralyzed.
He had been paralyzed. The story is about Jesus and opposition. Any other ideas what this story is about?
Well, it's about the angel troubling the water that helped him to be healed. You know, I brought my old Bible.
What did I start the class at saying? Huh? Go ahead,
Then I have a question about something here, but the fourth verse starts out with, "For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water."
Yeah.
Now, well, you did mention about this certain season when the angel, he wasn't there all the time. I said he, but whoever the angel was.
Don't want to misgender the angel here. There's a whole long backstory about angels and gender anyway, so go ahead.
And whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in. Let's see if I got this right. Okay, here we go. Was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. Anyway, the troubling of the water is what helped him, but since that man that you were talking about, the one who had the disease and couldn't get there first because somebody else always beat him to it, got up and got ahead of him. And so Jesus was able to ask him questions and then heal him. I read that part off of that last week.
So what do you think? How is this what the story is about, Lil?
Well,
for
I
you?
think it has a lot to do with it. I mean, you know, Jesus wasn't there to portray who he was because nobody knew who he was. And he was there, he just happened to observe this man, but there, you know, this man having trouble and needed help, and nobody would help him. And Jesus said, "Do you want to be well?" And told him to take up his bed and walk.
Okay, well then you raise a second point. Why was Jesus there? What was Jesus' goal in this story?
I think that he was there just to help, you know?
Okay.
Without people realizing who he was.
Okay.
You know, it doesn't make a difference if you go around pronouncing you're this and you're that. You know.
And he didn't do that. He kind of slipped in, healed the guy, slipped out.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, well, I don't know who did this. And then what does Jesus do later?
Don't sin.
Well, but does Jesus find the man, or does the man find Jesus?
Jesus found the man.
Found him.
That's explicit in 14, isn't it? Jesus found him. Jesus bumped into him. So, you know, Lily, that's a really important question in this story. Because what is Jesus doing in this story? Now, Jesus healed a man. That certainly happened. Opposition. The story is very much about opposition.
It's a Sabbath observance comes up.
Okay. Sabbath. There are a lot of issues in this story that we don't think often about. Number one, how many people are likely around the pool?
Well,
A lot.
There's 5 colonnades, and you get to that, they didn't build all that stuff. You know, you get the sense that they just kept building because more and more people would come to the pool. Here's this poor paralyzed. How long has he been paralyzed?
35 years.
38 years. 38 years, long time.
Probably all his life.
Probably all his life. How did the man live? Probably begging and or family kept him alive. But there's an interesting detail in there too, isn't there? What does the man, Jesus asked him, I mean, again,
Do you want to get well?
do you want to get well? Jesus asks him that. That's a really interesting question. Because, and the guy, again, you get, through these tiny little details, you get a sense of Jesus' personality. I mean, remember the conversation with Nicodemus. That didn't quite go the way Nicodemus wanted. Remember the conversation with the woman at the well. That didn't go how she expected. Then the conversation with the disciples. You get the sense that, boy, he drove those disciples nuts. And now, Jesus, you know, all these people sitting around, and then someone tells Jesus. Jesus sees the guy. Jesus says, "Hey, what's with that one?" So he says, "Oh, he's been here forever. He's been here forever." So Jesus says, hey, bub, you want to get well? Well,
If it's well, he'll lose his livelihood.
that's right. Well, sir,
Can't beg anymore.
I mean, that is a real question. But he's by the pool, so I have no one to help me into the pool. Well, that's interesting, because how's he staying alive? Probably begging, but he has no one to help him into the pool. You'd think if he'd had family around him that cared. Go ahead, Barbara.
I would like to ask, also, isn't it about faith? Because, all Jesus said was, pick up your bed, come on, let's go, and he did.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. And the last story we had, the man took Jesus at his word. Go ahead.
that was it. And I think that Jesus is not a first come, first served God either.
Well, this is...
First one makes it to the pool, gets healed, so kind of.
Barbara's got some questions about the angel too. I mean, how fair is that?
Yeah.
Little speed meritocracy at the pool, You got the able-bodied blind people are going to have a problem. Paralytics are going to have a problem. Who else was on that list? We got the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Well, I guess the deaf and the people that had problems with their hands and arms got in first. So,
Well, how did he get to the pool?
Exactly.
yeah, maybe this is sort of like a begging station here. But it's helpful for us to realize that in many places, in the Jewish world, you had people with money and people who don't. Well, we have that. The people who don't have money provide a service to the people with money. What service do they provide?
Service.
The service of need. What do you mean the service of need? Here's someone that you can give your money to. And we hear that, we think, you start giving the money to some organization, your mailbox is going to be full because they share those lists. So, but it was conceived of as a very important relationship because people with a lot have a need to be generous, and people with little have a need for that generosity. And so that was very well understood. Now, so no one's there to help him to get into the pool. While I try to get into it, someone else goes down ahead of me. So in other words, there's a little meritocracy going on with this angel that doesn't seem quite fair. That those who are a little stronger than the other ones get healed and the other ones not. Okay. And Jesus says to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. And at once the man was cured. Now, let's pause for a second here. What's involved in Jesus healing this man?
Just speaking.
Word.
He doesn't even say, be healed.
He doesn't even touch him.
He doesn't even touch him. He doesn't do anything. It's like, again, I'm going to talk, it's almost like a simulation theory when Jesus just makes a decision and things happen. And we saw that last week with the go home, your son's fine. That's all Jesus does. No anointing, And then that's why the story of when Jesus makes mud with spittle and puts it on the guy's eye. That's why the story, or puts his finger in his ears. That's why those stories are so weird, because this is Jesus' usual manner, just, hey, take up your mat, go home. But now, pause here, because how many people are around this pool?
Lots.
Any.
Great number.
So Jesus healing this man means what?
All the others weren't.
He's coming out to the public.
Well, but again, Jesus kind of did this on the slide, right?
He thought somebody saw him.
Well, and we'll get into that because we're going to find there's going to be another story in the Gospel of John that's a lot like this one. That's coming up later. That'll be a while before we get there. But what do you think of the idea that Jesus just kind of dipped in, healed this guy, and left everybody else there?
Well, why him and not any other?
Yeah,
I mean, you could have healed all of them. and
Yeah.
one guy.
yeah.
Or maybe this man had more need than the rest of them, or he could even walk. He, had to just lay there and watch other people get ahead of him. He couldn't even get to the pool, and he had probably been there before, waiting. By the time he did get there, he was probably one of the first to get there.
So it's a triage thing. So Jesus says, well, this guy's more needy, more deserving than the other ones. Well, he was up on the list, obviously, because of the long time. That gets noted. But why not just heal them all?
Because if then nobody would be able to say, why didn't he heal me?
Yeah, so, these are disturbing questions. And, and this is, Lou Smedes was a scholar, taught at Calvin College, went on to teach at Fuller Seminary, wrote a little book because at Fuller Seminary they were having a Signs and Wonders class, and there was a lot of controversy about this back in the 80s, and Lou Smedes basically wrote a tiny little book about should we celebrate a miracle? Because this guy picks up his mat and goes away. You think nobody noticed that?
No.
Jesus slips into the what? So it isn't the case that Jesus walks up there and it's just Jesus and this man and nobody else is around, and Jesus is like, oh, here's someone who's sick. I'm going to heal him. No, that's not the story. So right away, there's a lot of questions here behind the surface that I can't answer for you. But I just want to raise the question because it's really interesting about what Jesus is doing. So here's the question. Why was Jesus there? What is this story about? Barbara is right. I was leading y'all into a trap asking you that question because when we read a story like this, a lot of things pop into our mind, and all of these things this is a story about Jesus healing a man. Yeah, that's what it's a story about. This is a story about that angel, and they took out that verse. We talked about that last week. Talked about that. This is a story about Jesus and opposition. Yeah, we talked about that last week. But in a sense, if we want to think about what the story is about, even that question creates something of a hierarchy. Because there's all kinds of things that the story is about, but sort of what we want to get at, if we can, is and we get this with our language, what's the point of the story? And that's what we're going to have to do some work on, because there are a lot of contenders that we can ask, and all of them are valid, and they're fine to talk about. But part of what's fun about stories is, what's the point of this story? This is part of what's fun about studying the Bible, because people have been talking about what's the point of this story for 2,000 years. Because, there's just all these stories of Jesus healing people. Well, here's one. Well, why this one? It just goes on the top of the pile? That's going to be important when we get to the next section, which is the discourse, because we're going to want to think about the point of the story. So again, what's the point of the story? What is the story about?
You never know where you're going to find Jesus.
There's a fun one. That is a good one. I like that one. You never know what you're going to find. You never know when Jesus is going to pop in. And you're not going to know the reasons he pops in either. And you might not even know it's Jesus.
That's true. That is so true.
Because here's the guy sitting there. How long?
38 years.
38 years. He wants to get in. 38 years is a long time. And go ahead.
Did Jesus have to know something about this man to know he had been sinning?
Now, isn't that interesting too? Well, we're going to get into that question, because if you think people have missed the point, that little word that Jesus gives there, that's a huge point in this story. Well, when Jesus says, stop sinning, or something worse might happen, it's like, and again, if Jesus had handlers, people around him, just like campaign people have. They'd say to Jesus, "Oh, you don't go there, Jesus. Don't say that." Because wow.
Maybe Jesus met the woman at the well.
What's that?
Maybe Jesus thought he knew he had met the woman at the well.
Well, that's right. He knew she was. Jesus. And this is what's so interesting about Jesus. On one hand, people want to say Jesus didn't care about the personal sins of the people. Oh, okay. Well, why? Well, because he ate with sinners and tax collectors and was criticized for that. Yeah, that's true. This is also true. Says to the woman at the well, "Yeah, bring your husband." "Oh, I don't have a husband." "Yeah, you're right, because now this guy, hey, stop sinning or something worse might happen." And you say, worse than 38 years of paralytic? Worse than that angel coming down? I mean, here's what we think about that angel. That angel coming down and taunting me? Because, maybe that angel comes down and, well, where's the paralytic? Speedy's a little closer to him. Squirrel, I mean, you can come up with all kinds of stories about this. Okay, so what's the point of the story? What's this story about?
Well, the last verse, and then I think it has the rest of the chapter about Jesus' relationship with his Father.
Oh. My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. Jesus' relationship with his Father. Okay. What's another word? Well, Jesus, Father. And Jesus, Father, Jesus would use this word. What word would the rest of the people use?
Yahweh.
God. Yahweh. So what's Jesus' relationship with God? Because no Trinitarians yet. And so the question is, well, who is Jesus?
God.
Well, yeah.
We don't know that.
Boy, that's going to be the real issue in this story. And so, okay, back to the motive question that Lily raised. Why? Because again, okay, so Jesus goes to the festival. He decides to go by Bethesda or Bethsaida, depending on which text you read. And Jesus, there's lots of people lying here. For some reason Jesus picks this one. Ask someone about it. Oh, well, he's and then I can see again what I've just done is I've just reframed it. So now suddenly we're asking questions about motivation for Jesus. What is Jesus doing here? Now, it doesn't come up early, but what day is this?
Not working on the Sabbath.
Now, detail. So we haven't even gotten into that yet. Well, what is the Sabbath?
The day of rest.
Day of rest. Well, why is it? Where does this whole thing start? The Sabbath thing. Creation, Genesis. During the desert wanderings too, right? What happens with the desert wanderings? They're hungry, so God sends them what?
Man, they got to collect for 2 days.
Yeah, but some enterprising people, the first time it fell, collected for 2 days, and what happened?
Worms in it.
That's right. So then, when you get to the last day, God says, well, the next day is the Sabbath, so collect for 2 days. And some enterprising people say, what? Oh, I tried this already. Fool me once. Nope, not gonna do it. And they got to do what on the Sabbath?
Go hungry.
They got to fast on the Sabbath that week. So, well, here's a question. So the Sabbath thing gets going in Genesis 1, right? And it's mentioned in the Ten Commandments. It's a really big deal in that community. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work.
Your manservant or your maidservant, your ox or your ass.
That's right. Even the slaves And the animals, see, that's something we don't pay attention to. The slaves and the animals, what?
Rest.
You say, oh, today is the Sabbath. I can't get up and get my own stuff, so, bring me my lunch. No. On the Sabbath, not only you, but your servants and even your animals rest. Okay, so there's the Sabbath. Now, let's talk about the history of the Jewish people. So, you have this in creation, and then they're out in the desert wanderings, and they learn 6 days you shall gather your manna, but the seventh day you shall not. Each day you will go out and do your work. You won't collect all your manna for a week, and then, because it'll go moldy, and then the last day, well, you can collect enough for 2 days and you'll be fine. All right, and so does the story go like this? Israel went out into the desert and God gave them the rules, and then Israel learned the rules and learned to follow the rules, and everything was great, just like Deuteronomy 28 says. Is that the story of Israel?
No.
What's the story of Israel?
They broke the rules all the time.
Israel can't follow the rules. All right? Doesn't matter. They keep not following the rules until, eventually they get established in the land, and David takes this city, and Solomon builds this wonderful temple, and, the northern and the southern kingdom have their fallout, yada, 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 all of this stuff. In 586 BC, what happens?
Assyrians,
Babylonians come in, wipe out the temple, take a bunch of exiles up to Babylon. Story of Daniel, all that kind of stuff going on. Well, so then Babylon gets kicked over. Persia comes into power. Cyrus has a very different religious perspective than Babylon. Says, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Children of Israel, you go back to Jerusalem and you rebuild that temple, and I'll even pay for it. Well, thank you, Cyrus. Book of Isaiah calls Cyrus, wow, servant of the Lord. Cyrus is doing God's bidding. And the children of Israel come back to Jerusalem and they rebuild the temple, and they say, you know what? We learned our lesson. God gave us the rules. We're going to follow them. We're going to follow them very carefully. We're going to follow them in everything we do. One of the most important rules is, it's right there in the Ten Commandments. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. No work on the Sabbath. So, and people are like, okay, we got to no work, but right away a problem comes, right? What's the problem?
gotta live.
Well, you have to live. What do you mean by work?
What's work?
What's work? Is...
Would they milk their cows on the Sabbath?
Oh, there's a question. I knew some Dutch dairymen that didn't like cows too much because, doggone it, every day you got to go down to that barn and milk those cows. Sabbath or no Sabbath? So, what about cow milking? Any other questions about enforcement of this rule?
How far you can walk?
How far you can walk? Because, see, is work about exactly what we're doing? Is work about motivation? This gets very hard. So, how do we know if we're doing it right? Well, then we find pastors and scribes and lawyers and elders, and we say, we'll make a list of rules. So you can walk 2 miles, no more. You can, I'm just making these up. You can fix a meal, but you can't harvest your field. Okay. You can milk the cow, but you can't drive the milk into market. You have to keep it in the fridge. You bring it the next day. Yeah, what if you don't have a fridge? Right.
Now,
So, but that's, go ahead.
You're making that up, but the Jewish
They did.
temple had a bunch of rules. They were there.
Well, that's exactly right.
Hundreds.
This is what you have to do. You got to make up all the rules because people got to know what to do.
They call it hedging the Torah.
They call it hedging the Torah because it said, well, here's the target, and then people are like, well, I can't walk more than 2 miles. What if it's 2.1? Is there a real problem with 2.1? And how about, okay, 2.1 is that, how about 2.05? Can I do that? I mean, and so then the question is, well, what are you going to do? Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that you don't work by setting a standard. And, you know, it's like, if you go to Yosemite, well, you can walk right up there to the edge and look over the edge. Yeah, we're going to put a little wall there. We're going to put a little sign. We're going to make sure that nobody goes over the edge.
But they kind of, yeah.
So one of the rules was, well, you can't, let's try this, you can't relocate your home. Well, what's a home? Well, maybe home is where you sleep. Oh, okay. So how would you know if something is a home? Well, you have your bedding there. Oh, okay. So
You're ready.
you can't move your bedding. Does it mean you can make your bed, you just can't move your bed. Oh, okay. So this man, what's he getting in trouble for?
Carrying his bed.
Moving his bed. You're moving on the Sabbath. What do you mean I'm moving? Everybody has to move. No, you don't understand. You're relocating your domicile, and this we don't allow. Okay, so he's in trouble now. And this is very interesting too. Who is the fellow who told you to pick up and walk? Why do they want to know that? The fellow who told them there's no rule against talking on the Sabbath. Talk. Lots of people talk. That wasn't outlawed. Certain kinds of talking is probably outlawed. Like, I'll tell you what, I'll sell you this grain if you give me this silver. Well, that's work. What do you mean work? I'm moving my lips, and the other talking wasn't work, but this talking is work. You can very quickly see how this becomes an issue. So very interesting. So what's really on the minds of the religious authorities that are enforcing the no work thing?
Who's this guy that worked?
Who was the guy that told them?
So it's one thing, because do they really care? How much do they really care about this paralytic that's been? What do they really care about? I mean, all these people asking him about whether or not they weren't there to help him into the pool.
They don't care about him. They just care about the guy who told them to break the rule.
Why do they care about the guy who told them to break the rule?
They might start
He's gonna talk.
a trend.
Yeah, he only told this one guy to break the rule. He might tell more. We gotta watch this. Because one little paralytic kind of, sloughing off with his mat, but we could have whole reams of rule breaking. And, well, what did all the rule breaking cause before?
Exile.
God's judgment on the nation. So what goes on in these people's minds about how Israel is to be, let's use this, saved? What does salvation for Israel look like?
Keeping the rules.
No, that's not the goal of salvation. That's the means of salvation. What's the goal of salvation? What does salvation for Israel look like?
Not being punished.
They're
Reconciling.
An independent nation.
Independent nation. Certainly you get the Romans off your back. What else? They had pictures in their minds.
Prosperity.
Prosperity. Military supremacy. domination of it. They're thinking about, remember David and Solomon? Boy, that was the golden age of Israel, David and Solomon. They built the temple. The Edomites, they didn't have problems with the Philistines anymore. The sower, remember when we had the sower and the reaper, the person who sows their field gets to reap their field. And there's lots of stories like this in the Old Testament. Everybody has their own house, a chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. I mean, we keep doing this, don't we? This isn't new. That's what saved looks like. Well, the law, this isn't too different from us, because, what if someone breaks a law and gets away with it? So I decide I'm going to drive 85 through Sacramento on I-5. Well, we've all been driving down I-5 and seen someone, and then somebody says, well, I want to get down to LA quicker. Why don't I drive a little faster? So then everybody starts driving a little faster, and then the cops start measuring average speed on the highway. Well, the posted speed is 65 and it's 70, but we'll give you 5 to 10 over, generally speaking, blah, 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 blah. But pretty much then suddenly everybody's driving 75, 80 all the way down there, and the cops say what? Yeah, we gotta dial this back. So what do?
Start pulling people over.
Yeah, put a little police cruiser right there on the side of the road, and guess what happens when people see that police cruiser? Well, these guys are doing exactly the same thing, right? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
So when Jesus said, stop sinning, was he talking about picking up his mat?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, is Jesus being the police here too? What's the relationship between sin and saved in the way that the Jews are thinking about? And where does God fit into that? And where does our definition of God fit into that?
God's out of the picture. It's what you do.
Talk to me.
I can't talk to you. It's what you do that you're saved. The laws that you keep. Your perfect life. It's not anything to do with God's or Jesus' death and salvation.
So that's what they're thinking. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's how
You earn it.
their point of view in their head.
Yeah, and it's not too different from the California Highway Patrol and their idea about what saved looks like on I-5. Saved on I-5 for the California Highway Patrol looks like what?
Obeying the speed limit.
80.
Well, no accidents. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Nobody wants any accidents.
Right.
Wants everybody to get from Sacramento to Los Angeles without any trouble. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. So they have a speed limit, so they do some enforcement, and they've always got some, it's usually young guys who a little bit too much testosterone, and they bought that fast car, or some older guy that thinks everything he does is so important, or actually in my family the women drive faster than the men often, but so what? Let's not be sexist here. But this question about God, because actually there's a lot going on here with this question of God, because, what do we mean by this word?
Well, the Jews should have known there's only one God.
All right. There's one God. And last week we talked about this distinction. Well, one Jewish scholar talked, basically there's this meta-divine realm and what we call polytheism is in there. And then on the other side there's God. And in this administration, you have all of these actors, and they're all trying to make their way through. And what the way the meta-divine realm functions in this is that they, of all these patterns, or laws. There's that word again. And if you learn these laws, then you can work the system and get what you want. Okay, so...
Israel's adopted that.
Oh. See, the funny thing about laws are really helpful things. We talked about this before. Because having a speed limit on I-5 is a helpful thing. Because it kind of helps everybody know, well, let's all get together on agreement in terms of how fast. Because if one person's if everyone's sort of flowing through at 70, and you've got one little timid new driver or a senior citizen, and they're putting down I-5 at 40, you got a problem. And because not only can you drive too fast, you can drive too slow. You have to, and because the point of the law isn't, you shall not drive more quickly than that. The point of the law is, let's have everybody go at a speed where we can all get from Sacramento to Los Angeles in one piece. All right? There's a lot going on here. Now, God, once you imagine that there's a person at the bottom or the top, depending on which way you're looking at it, of existence, well, we still kind of we talked about this last week, we still want to kind of know the rules of the person. You know, if you go into Lily's house and you're staying with Lily on Sunday morning, understand that Lily's got to get to church. So don't bug Lily too much when Lily's getting ready for church. She got places to go. All right? That's a rule of Sunday morning with Lily. Now, maybe another day of the week, she doesn't have to get out that early. So, you can say, Lily, can I have a glass of orange juice? And she'll say, sure. So, we all have these rules, but the question is, in what context are these rules? All right. So, we've got the rules, and to be saved in this system is to, do what you can with the laws and achieve this. All right? Oh. Now, certainly the other persons and agents in here, just because there's personhood at the base of reality doesn't mean that these people shouldn't behave in certain ways. Because, in a household, everybody does have to sort of learn to behave with one another and figure out the rules and figure out how to get along. But these two systems are a little bit different. Now, let's get back to this Sabbath thing. Sabbath. What is Sabbath about? 6 days you shall labor and do all your rest, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. What is rest? Now, again, this comes up in Genesis 1 because God rested. Well, what does that mean, that God rested? And especially if we're in not the meta-divine realm, it's called the MDR, but we're under the administration of God, the God. And, what if, read the Heidelberg Catechism. The Heidelberg Catechism says things like, God upholds the universe at every moment, and if God were to withdraw his hand, poof, it would all go away. So, and actually there was a big conversation amongst Jewish scholars. Does God work on the Sabbath? And they had a big theological dispute about that.
Well, if you got everybody in the whole nation paying attention to God on one day, then yeah, he's working.
That's right. But here's another question. For the Jews, if you read the Old Testament, Sabbath wasn't a day of cultic practice. What do I mean by that? They didn't go to the temple necessarily on the Sabbath.
It was trusting God.
It was now we're getting into the question again of motivation. What is work? 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, and the seventh day is a Sabbath. Well, God works on the seventh day. Well, what work is God doing on the seventh day? What is the seventh day really about? Reflection.
Appreciation.
Appreciation. Now we're using psychological, emotional
But
ideas.
it's also trusting God to provide because you're not working.
So that, when you listen to the little manna story, that seems pretty clear in that story that God was making a point about their relationship with Him and their dependence on Him. That's built into the story. So maybe this idea, so what's the point of this? Well, we're going to struggle with that because there seems to be a lot of things to it. Well, how can we get at all these things? Well, we could probably get at it through a story. And well, we've got a story here.
Paul, somewhere along the line would obey fit in there?
Oh, yeah.
Trust and obey?
Yeah. So, but that's exactly sort of what this story is about, because the scholars the Jewish rulers were saying, well, you're not obeying by carrying your mat.
You're working.
You're working.
Except you told me to.
Yeah, something told. And then who told you to? Now we've got questions of Jesus' authority. You see that? I mean, we're not. I asked you, well, what is the point? Gosh, we're proliferating here. There's more and more stuff built into this. But it's really important stuff. And it coheres in the story. So again, we'll get back to Lily's question. Why? What is on Jesus? Well, let me ask you this. Does this seem incidental to Jesus' mission?
No.
No. 6 days Jesus can heal and do all kinds of things, but doggone it, if you read John and the Synoptic Gospels, he just keeps picking the Sabbath to do these public healings on.
He's making a point.
He's making a point. He's pushing at something in the political system. And he's being really cagey with it, isn't he? And he's not going out there with a sandwich board and saying, we need to reconsider the theology of Sabbath keeping in the Jewish nation. He's not doing that. If Jesus did that, what would maybe happen?
Get killed.
Well, there's that Jesus guy with that weird sandwich board. They didn't do that. He's really sneaky the way he does that. He pops into where he knows he's going to find a whole bunch of people. He picks on one guy who everybody's going to know has been there forever. I mean, yeah, these all people, he's been here a few days, he's been here a few weeks. This guy over here, he's been hanging out here 38 years. He's practically an institution at this pool. And that doggone angel's just playing with all those people, See if he can get in today. He's paralyzed. Oh, he's scraping his way. Too bad. No healing for you today. Jesus swoops in and says, psst, hey, bub, you want to get well? The guy's like, you kidding?
He doesn't even answer the question.
No, he doesn't. You're right. He doesn't say yes. What does he do? Oh, I don't have anybody to help me. That's a good beggar, If you're a good beggar, you gotta outcompete the rest of the beggars. He doesn't have legs, so have a really sad story. And Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." And at once the guy probably feels strength in his legs. How long since he had felt strength in his legs?
38 years.
Picks it up and he walks. And Well, now this is interesting too. Now, see, notice again the way it's written, verse 9. The day on which this took place was, oh, by the way, now that we're thinking about it, we withheld that little juicy detail until this part of the story. Well, this is interesting. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man, now again, just notice the framing of the story. And this is the way stories work. Stories present details to us and allow other details to just sort of recede and pass away. If you are, and this is what happens all the time when people try to make movies of Jesus stories, you'd very quickly have a staging blocking issue right here in the story. Because what would we expect to happen so the guy, the story doesn't tell us anything about this. The guy suddenly, whoa, how long does it take for him to figure out he can walk? He's been without walking for 38 years. How long? I mean, we have no idea. Could it?
At once.
Oh, well, there we go. At once. He was cured. He picked up immediately. The man became well and picked up his mat and began to walk. Oh, right away. Whoop, whoop, there it is. What does Jesus do? Well, a little later we learn he disappears. Because you would think the guy would be, what's going through the guy's mind?
Am I dreaming?
Am I dreaming? Hundreds of things probably at once.
And who is that man?
That's right. And who is that man? So my friend Rod Hugan, who's a pastor down in Tucson, he tells the story of when he was a little boy. He didn't see well. He didn't see right, almost from birth. He says he was born blurry. So then finally, everybody thought he was a little dim. And finally he goes to school, and one of the teachers begins to notice, what's wrong with little Rodney? And she gets an idea in her head and says to Rodney's mother, why don't you take him to the doctor, have his eyes checked? Oh. So she takes him to the doctor. Doctor, well, how do you check eyes back in the day? Well, you take, here's a pair of glasses. Let's put it on this kid. So Rod's 6 years old, 5, 6 years old, so he remembers this. And doctor takes these glasses, puts it on his eye. It's like, whoa! I mean, he had never seen clearly his entire life. And the first thing it is, he takes the glasses off. Because there's too much information.
Too scary.
Too scary. And, I think we're on to something here. And, eventually they get him fitted for glasses, and eventually he gets used to seeing the world clearly, on and on and on and on and on. Boom, this happens to the guy. And Jesus slips away. And he says, okay, Jesus, what game are you playing here? Again, Jesus could have, like Lily said, Jesus could have walked at the pool. I am Jesus here at the pool of Bethesda. That frustrating angel's been picking on the paralytics and the lame all this time, and the blind, because, the blind and the paralytics, they keep walking into these pillars. It's the people with arm problems always get into the pool first. That hardly seems fair. So you're all healed today. It's like Oprah. You get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. She doesn't do any of that. She just walks in and says, how about, you want to get healed? Go ahead, Edward.
This is one of the first, the only healings I'm aware of where Jesus didn't say your faith has made you well.
Yes. Yeah. The guy exhibits zero, all the things we would imagine would qualify him for you and not you. No, there's nothing there. Nothing there in the story.
The only thing is that he obeyed Jesus.
He did get
He
up.
said, are you kidding? I can't get up.
That's right. He did at least try. Whether he had tingling or no tingling, we don't know. And then, it's the Sabbath. Get your mat. Who told you? Well, it was the guy. The man healed had no idea who it was. Jesus didn't have a little name tag. Jesus didn't say, I am Jesus here to do better than the angel. Doesn't do any of that. And then Jesus finds him. And what does Jesus say to him?
Stop sinning.
I mean, you just got to have a sense that Jesus is having fun with this. But it's also serious. So we're out of time. And, yeah. So let those questions marinate, and Lily will work her out in her study Bible this week and come back with more questions next week.
It's her old Bible that.
That's right. It was that old Bible that made her.
Verse 4.
That's only because it was on my mind. That's the first thing I did. I ran and grabbed the old Bible and looked it up.
Verse 4 was that.
How about that mean old angel? You know, why don't you keep why only the first one in the pool? Why not?
Well, my question is the season. What season was that when the angel would come and trouble the water? And as well as, you know, the people that had been there and still coming. You know, it's like a pilgrimage when people just come and they keep coming and keep coming. And yet, you know, you only one at a time, I suppose, could get in the pool.
I suppose. And if that paralytic was paying any attention in his 38 years of being there, maybe he could have figured out the season. So, you know, everybody's just lying around and he's like, hey, right by the edge of it. So, you know, if he can predict, that's right, predict the season, flop, then he'll get in. 38 years, you'd think he could find a pattern.
So from time to time, it doesn't.
Yeah, and from time to time, and that it seemed to be random, or at least not something we scientific people would say. Well, let's put cameras on this, and let's time it, and let's put a calendar, and then, you know, we'll give the secret to the 38-year guy, or we in our country, we'd make a line. Well, you've been there 38 years, you get to go first. Seniority.
Take a number.
Take a number, exactly. You think the angel could at least have one of those little take a number things? Come on, angel, what are you doing here? And then Jesus just swoops in, picks this guy. Well, why is Jesus picking this guy? Jesus is picking a fight.
This one was obvious that it wasn't a farce. I mean, this guy, everybody knew he'd been there for a long time.
That's right. Jesus is picking, when everybody sees, let's call a guy Fred, when everybody sees Fred strolling through the temple with his mat under his arm, who's been there 38 years, doesn't matter if you're only coming to this festival every 5 or every decade, everybody knows Fred. Because he's always been there. And not the temple, at the pool there. But everybody knows Fred. And Jesus is picking a fight. And Jesus does this in such a cagey way. It's not a sandwich board. Oh, there's the guy with the sandwich board talking about, Sabbath. No. Jesus knows exactly how to set the people off and to provoke the conversation he wants to have.
Nobody asked who performed this miracle. It's like, who told you?
Yes! Yes!
Who told you to pick them up?
Exactly! You'd think, Fred, you're walking.
Nobody's rejoicing that he's healed.
That's right! Fred, congratulations! You've got legs! Nobody cares about Fred. They care about the rules and the system. Now again, we hear that and say, oh, they care about the rules. Yeah, but there's some rules we really care about a lot.
Yeah, you picked up your mat
Yeah, but
on the Sabbath.
but you know,
It's like there's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and they're really micromanaging.
right. And so Jesus is asking, what is this Sabbath law about? And Jesus is asking, who can conduct this conversation? And in many ways, what Jesus, just give you a little tidbit, what Jesus is pretty much saying is, I am the Sabbath. You're the what? You're a day in the week? Kind of. And so, yeah, there's Jesus is plotting this. Go ahead, Marty.
6, verse 6 said, the LEB, Jesus knew, and the NIV says Jesus when he learned.
Right?
And then the
Yeah, the LEB says, one and knew that he had been sick a long time already. Yeah. Why is the NIV saying that? Good question, Marty. I haven't looked into that.
Because it sounds like somebody told him, or told him about. In other words, he learned. In other words, he didn't.
Well, see, so it's just looking over here at the Greek. Basically, and you always have this with language, the Greek word there could be understood as knew or learned.
Okay.
And so the translators are, but you're right. And again, this gets into interesting things. Well, if Jesus knew it without having been told it, well, how many years how familiar was Jesus with this place? There's another question. So, but again, I want to get to Jesus is picking a fight. Jesus is picking a fight in a very crafty way. He's wanting to, Lily's like, well, he isn't there saying, I'm going to heal all your people. No, he isn't. But he knows exactly what buttons to push in these people to get them to actually learn something. And you know what? That is right here in the story. The story is very sneaky. Because what's the story about? Well, the story is about, it's about the angel. It's about the man. The story is about Jesus and Sabbath and what Sabbath is. Because that's a really big question. What is Sabbath? When God rested on the seventh day, so John Walton, who's an Old Testament scholar and studied other ancient, I guess we're running out of time, other ancient Near East texts said, Genesis 1 is obvious. What do you mean it's obvious? Genesis 1 is a temple text. Well, what do you mean it's a temple text? I don't see a temple in Genesis 1. Gods rest in temples, just like kings rest in palaces. What do you mean rest? You mean like sleeping? No. Like
Got from their labor.
No. This is
That's
where
they are.
This is where they reign from. This is where in Genesis 1, God has established the order, declares it good, very good, and says,
I'll enjoy.
Let the
Look what I did.
let the thing begin.
The thing.
Now, what to call it? Let the world begin. Let's begin. And it's the beginning of exactly, it's beginning of everything that he's been looking for. And so when Jesus says, you don't really pay any attention about Fred here, who's carrying his mat. Nobody says, Fred, 38 years you've been laying by that pool. Where are you bringing your mat to?
There's no mercy.
They don't care about the guy at all. And Jesus is the rule breaker. Oh, Jesus is dangerous. Jesus goes into all of these places and he heals these people on the Sabbath. We got to get him to stop. Instead of saying, well, why don't you keep healing him on some of the other days too? What if every day was Sabbath? What if every day was Sabbath? Maybe Jesus is pointing us to something. So we'll get into that.
Use it for next week.
Let's pray. Lord, we long for Sabbath. We long for creation to work as it should. We long for the striving that we have to do in the 6 days just to put food on the table to end. We long for the reconciliation of heaven and earth. But Lord, it hasn't come yet. But one has come who embodies Sabbath. And he's playfully making his point in an annoying way, because annoyance gets our attention. And Lord, help us to learn from that, and help us to embody that, and help us to begin to live in that. So hear our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen.